This is the FlyDigi Apex 4, and it is the most advanced, customizable, and just downright diabolical controller that money can buy today. And if you think this thing looks like a robot, well, you're probably not too far off. At a high level, you're getting force adjustable analog sticks, force feedback triggers, yes you heard that right, FlyDigi's crunchy, crispy, clickety D-pad, a built-in LED screen and an onboard operating system, and a wireless polling rate and response time that matches most wired controllers today. And let me tell you, that is just the tip of the iceberg with this controller, and I am extremely excited to share this comprehensive review of the FlyDigi Apex 4 with you today. Before we get started, I want to say a huge thanks to FlyDigi for sending this controller for me to review. I've purchased a bunch of their controllers myself in the past and I'm a huge fan of them. And FlyDigi had no influence over the video, nor did they see it before it went live. If you like the look of this controller by the end, please go ahead and check the description box below for links to their website and also to AliExpress and Amazon where you can purchase this controller for yourself. So here's the Apex 4, and it is nothing short of striking with its first impression. It has this white and silver colorway, with just a little bit of blue peeking through in the analog sticks. The other first impression you're going to have when you hold it is its weight. It is a whopping 325 grams, which is substantially heavy for a controller. But partly thanks to that weight, this controller also feels rock solid in the hands. It could honestly be a controller made of solid iron for all I know. But that bulky heavy weight and the rock solid feeling in the hands really go a long way to give this controller a lot of character. And looking at this controller, everywhere you look there seems to be some kind of detail. A magnet, a logo, a line, a shape or a button. Everywhere has detail. The front plastic here is ever so slightly frosted, but also very smooth. It's funny because the texture almost has this gentle smoothness to it, despite the busy aesthetic. And of course we have LEDs on this controller too, with these two lines upon the grips, and a logo which may be more than it appears. And finally we have the customizable and functional LED screen. We're going to look at this a little bit later on, but the screen grants you access to connection modes, customization, and more. It looks cool and is a really eye-catching detail. But it does actually look a little bit washed out due to the material used on the controller faceplate, and the distance of the screen from the faceplate itself. It's very bright and colourful underneath, but once you get the faceplate on, it's just a little bit less so. One benefit of this setup though is that the screen is completely invisible when it's switched off, or if you just set it to an all-black screen. On the back of the controller, you're going to see these thick rubber grips in light grey, 4 programmable macro keys, an on-off switch, and a glimpse of those cobalt blue triggers. Taking a closer look up top, there are white dotted shoulder buttons, and those beautiful, smooth, transparent blue triggers, which also have a little dotted texture to them. You'll also see the USB-C cable for charging and a wired connection, along with a mounting hole for a smartphone holder. When it comes to look and feel, the Apex 4 speaks for itself, with a unique, striking, and futuristic design that honestly looks like something out of Star Trek. Just not Discovery, obviously. The Apex 4 is absolutely packed to the brim with features, and we're going to be going over as many of these as we can in this video. But on a basic level, this controller ships with a 2.4 GHz dongle in the box, which gives you up to a 1000 Hz polling rate and a 1 millisecond response time. It can also be connected via Bluetooth with up to a 500 Hz polling rate. And then of course it supports a wired connection too. It works with PC, Android, iOS, and Nintendo Switch, but it doesn't currently work with PlayStation or Xbox as far as I'm aware. It has a 6-axis gyroscope on board, which works both for the Nintendo Switch and universally in any other game or platform. And you get full customization too, via an Android app or a computer program. When it comes to controls, pretty much everything on the Apex 4 is stand out. The face buttons here are mechanical, but they feel a lot different from any mechanical switch you've used, I promise. These have a ton of travel because they're a custom design, and you get almost the same amount of travel that you would get with a membrane switch, but with a really satisfying, high-pitched robotic click at the end. These are so good to press down on, they honestly feel amazing. The actuation force isn't too high either, and the tactile response is unmissable. These buttons just feel great no matter what you're doing, and they work perfectly for QTEs or quick taps as well. And as for the D-pad, well, if you've seen my Direwolf 2 review, you've seen something similar to this. FlyDigi's design is unique, and it is super crispy. Here's what I mean. There is a tactile click on this D-pad in 8 different directions, and it feels absolutely incredible. In a way, it kind of slides around rather than pivoting, but it works really well in this case. The bowl shape is incredibly comfortable, and I've actually been converted to bowl-shaped D-pads thanks to FlyDigi's controllers. It is just incredibly comfortable to use. You can just hold your thumb in the center of it and gently slide your thumb around, and get the ultimate in tactile response. It works perfectly for fighting games, for fast-paced platforming, and for whatever other games you want to play on it. And something that's really great about this D-pad combined with the face buttons is that they make the Apex 4 just as good for retro gaming as it is for modern gaming. And usually I find a controller has to compromise in one way or the other, but not in this case. The only reservation there is with the D-pad here is that it might just be too loud for some people. Especially if you're playing a game like Pokemon Puzzle League where you just need to move your cursors around. The clickiness can be a bit much. Not for me, but maybe for you or other people. The other keys like Start, Select, and the function buttons on this controller are clicky switches as well, but it's kind of dampened and not too loud. It doesn't sound cheap, that's what I'm saying. And now for the analog sticks. Just take a look at these insane modules. Underneath the cap you can see how the analog stick moves up and down and left and right on 2 different axes, which is just really interesting to see at a basic level. But these analog sticks feel absolutely great. In fact, these analog sticks feel exactly how you want them to. And that's because you can actually adjust the tension using the screw holes next to the stick themselves to make them either stiffer or looser. The maximum tension here is surprisingly stiff with a lot of heft, whilst the minimum is almost feather light. It almost feels like you could shake the controller and move the stick in this case. So you can really dial this into how you want it to feel physically. But then you can combine that with the software customization and these sticks can be tuned to your absolute and most exact specifications. The analog stick caps themselves are very grippy, and they're also very broad. It's something I really like about FlyDigi's controllers are just their massive analog sticks. And these caps can actually be swapped out for different heights, although you do have to buy those separately like I did. Anyway, moving on to the shoulder buttons, they're subtly clicky with a dotted inner texture. These have a very low actuation force, and are just as quiet as I would want a clicky tactile switch to be. Not obnoxious at all. And now onto the triggers. These look absolutely beautiful in this transparent cobalt blue, with a rounded flared shape. As usual, FlyDigi's triggers are practically frictionless, but they do require just a little bit of pressure to push down. This makes it easy to hold them in one place, but not too light that you can't rest your fingers on them. And just like the Direwolf 2 and the Vader 3 Pro, the Apex 4's triggers are dampened, which means that if you push them down hard, they're not going to click with a loud plastic on plastic click. Instead, you'll just get a muted, softer sound. I actually never noticed this in the controller until I started to notice it with the Vader 3 Pro. And now it's really hard to use a controller that doesn't have dampened triggers. With this setup, you're never going to be bothered by constant clicking of the trigger buttons, and that really does go a long way for the overall enjoyment of the controller. Now, of course, the big thing about these triggers is that they have force feedback, and they can be customized to no end. For example, you can set them to react like a sniper shot, or rumble like the gravel beneath your wheels. But these are very much a physical feature. I mean, this actually changes how the trigger feels when you push down on it. So it's really hard to show that on video, but suffice to say, you can tune these triggers and make them feel exactly how you want to. But we're going to take a closer look at the trigger customization a little bit later. By the way, before I continue, this controller is in Chinese out of the box, so if you're planning to buy it or you did just buy it, here's how to set it to English. With the controller powered on, and it doesn't matter if it's connected to anything or not, hold down the home button to enter the menu. Then browse to the 4th icon that has a gear. Then select the first option on the 2nd row and you'll be presented with Chinese or English. So just go ahead and select English. So anyway, playing a game with the Apex 4 is just such an amazing experience. And I mean any kind of game. Like I said earlier, the D-pad is just great for retro gaming. It's easy to use and it doesn't fatigue your fingers over a long time. Similarly, the face buttons are easy enough to press and lightning fast. They're very easy to tap quickly, and very precise as well. These 2 inputs in particular are just so tactile and responsive. The feedback that you get here is so good that it's almost impossible to accidentally press the wrong button. It really is amazing. The analog stick caps are big and grippy and easy to use, and your fingers are basically never going to slip off of them. The sticks feel incredibly accurate, but of course that comes down to how you tune them as well. With a fast reflex-based platformer like Lunastis, I like to have the sticks loosened all the way. But for something like a rally game, I prefer having the sticks heavier. The triggers are perfect for analog inputs. Or if you're playing, for example, an FPS game and you don't want an analog input, you can set this to hair trigger mode and set a trigger lock, so that there's a shorter press of the trigger. This works just great for quickly firing a gun, for example. Finally, let's quickly talk about the gyro when you're playing on Nintendo Switch. It works absolutely great with plenty of sensitivity, and there are no nasty surprises at all here. Also, that trigger lock I mentioned earlier is perfect for the Nintendo Switch as well, since the triggers here don't even support analog inputs. So when it comes down to it, in-game the Apex 4 performs brilliantly. No matter what type of game that you're playing, all of the controls feel well and you can customize them enough to work for basically anything. The only two reservations I have are the aforementioned noise of the D-pad and face buttons. For some people this might simply be too much. But also, I kind of feel like this controller feels serious. It's perfect for big, heavy games where you blow stuff up or shred metal. For example, like Armored Core, or Call of Duty, or like a rally game or something like that. And that's because it's big and heavy and the controls are chunky, and it works well for that kind of game and feels just right. But it feels a bit strange to play, I don't know, Animal Crossing with it. That's like a totally anecdotal feel fact, but it is what it is. By the way, another detail of the Apex 4 that is brilliant is its rumble. It's not HD rumble or haptic feedback, but it's just a very, very deep type of rumble that feels very immersive. You can also set the trigger to vibrate along with the controller. And of course, it goes without saying that you can customize that vibration to feel however you want it to. And those two things combined make this a very immersive type of rumble. The other noticeable thing about this controller is the latency, or rather the lack thereof. When connected with the 2.4 GHz dongle, this controller has a massive 1000 Hz polling rate and a 1 millisecond response time. I'm not sure if any other wireless controller on the market is this fast. And just to contextualize this, the wired and wireless latency on this controller are basically the same. It's incredibly noticeable just how responsive and quick this thing is. And that's especially when you go back and try a different controller afterwards. Finally, let's talk about the battery life. Because despite everything going on here, like the screen and the vibration and everything else, the battery life is just kind of wild. This controller functions for up to around 20 hours of live usage in my tests, which is just fantastic. Obviously this will probably be a little bit more or a little bit less depending on what kind of rumble and other features you're using, but it just kind of feels like this controller is always ready to go. Now I know that we've already been here for a while, but I'm going to show you all of the possible customization options and how to set them up on this controller in just a second. But for now I want to show you a few of the accessories I also have for this controller. I purchased all of these myself after FlyDigi sent me the Apex 4 because I just really wanted a bunch of cool accessories to go with it. First of all is the FlyDigi case. This is a little bit thin, but it's good enough to protect the controller and I think it looks pretty great too. It's really lightweight, which is definitely a bonus for a heavy controller like this. Next up is the phone mount, and this thing is universal for all FlyDigi and probably GameSir controllers. The mount simply slots very sturdily into the top, your phone goes into it, and boom, just connect with Bluetooth or the dongle or a wire, and you can now play on the go whilst you're out and about. Also, the USB cable for charging or wired connection still fits with the mount on. This is great if you're out and about and you also have no shame and you just really want to play Call of Duty or something on your phone and just annihilate your competition. And finally, here we have what I consider to be an essential add-on to the Apex 4, the official FlyDigi Dock. This comes in white or black and it looks fantastic with the Apex 4. The dock is surprisingly heavy and very, very stable and also non-slip. It plugs in with a USB-C port and then has USB-A for pass-through. Your controller connects with magnets and then powers on automatically when picked up. So with that USB dongle inserted and this dock connected to your PC, you can charge the controller, then lift it up for it to connect instantly by itself. If you're looking to buy an Apex 4, I 100% encourage you to pick up this dock as well. I consider it totally essential. And the added bonus is that it also works with the Apex 3 and the FlyDigi Vader 3 Pro as well. So I've been talking a lot about customization, so let's jump in and take a look at what's possible here. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised at what is available. This part is split into 3 sections: hardware, onboard, and software. So starting with hardware customization. First up is the analog stick covers. Pull them up and gently twist them to the left to remove them. When you want to put them back on, the long prongs should be in the up and down directions. But you can swap these out for other FlyDigi caps. Next up is the faceplate. Now I'm not entirely sure that any additional faceplates are or will be available, but what you need to do is pull off the analog stick caps, then pull the D-pad off by pulling it straight upwards, and then the magnetic faceplate will just lift off. With the faceplate off, the first thing you can do is to tighten or loosen your analog sticks. Believe it or not, an analog stick tightening tool is built into this controller, and it's on the right hand side here. Just pull this little key out, and then turn the screw next to either analog stick. Turn it anti-clockwise to loosen the stick, and clockwise to tighten the stick. It will get pretty difficult to tighten once you're at the maximum, so be sure not to over tighten this. When you're done, you can slip the tool back into the slot and it will magnet in place. Magnificent. The last thing you can customize with the hardware here is this little LED cover with the FlyDigi logo on it. Now all you need to do is to pull this up from its slot, but don't use any kind of tool to do this because it might get scratched. Inside the box you're going to get a handful of blank inserts just like this one. And you'll also get a SIM card tool which you can use to scratch your own art or logo or whatever you want into the insert. So you can draw or write whatever you want on this little slip, push it back into place, and it will light up and glow with the LED lights. How awesome is that? This is my first try. It's supposed to be Sonic, but whatever. So now let's move on to the onboard customization. This is all revolving around using the onboard operating system to control the controller. I should not have written that sentence that way. Anyway, hold the home button to enter the menu. Under the Connect menu, you can choose a platform, PC, Android, Switch, or iOS, and then the type if necessary, for example the Bluetooth, the dongle, or wired. By selecting the Android mode, you get the option to connect directly or to the FlyDigi app for screen mapping. By selecting more, you'll get to choose specific protocols and methods. For example, you can choose to connect to either the dongle or the Bluetooth mode in either the direct input or X input modes. By selecting repairing, you can unpair this controller from all devices and start fresh. Next up is button mapping. In trig mode, you can set the triggers to one of a few different profiles. Normal is just the normal free trigger. Race adds a little bit of resistance on the way down, similar to a gas pedal. Sniper adds a gentle lock at about 10%, followed by a hard snap when the button is pressed with enough pressure. Basically, you're pulling a gun trigger here, like a sniper rifle. Recoil mode adds a machine gun-like automatic repeating recoil to the trigger when it's held down. And trigger limits limit the trigger at either 25, 50, or 75% pushes. This is great for hair triggers and for when you want limited range. You can actually push past the resistance and push it all the way down if you want, but this is supposed to encourage gentle presses. And the vibration mode adds vibration to the trigger at the same time that the grips of the controller would vibrate. Now there's a lot more to this which we'll get to in just a moment, but for now we'll back out and go to the button edit mode. By going into button, it lets you remap the 4 macro keys on the back of the controller to any single button. You can press A on that button to be mapped, and then press any other button on the controller to map it too. And that includes Start, Select, L3 and R3 and whatever else you want. Turbo adds the turbo function to the macro keys, but not to any other button on the controller. This is useful for adding turbo to a button that you want without affecting the original button itself. And then macro of course lets you set up macros. Test mode lets you confirm where each button is currently mapped to. And then you can use the reset function to erase all of your mapping. Finally, going into config switch, you can switch between 4 onboard profiles. You can actually switch to a profile and then change its settings on the controller itself. And those changes will persist each time you choose that profile. There's actually a quick switcher for the profiles as well, which we'll look at in a little bit. And finally we have settings. Here you can change the brightness of the screen, the vibration strength which is universally applied to both grips, the language from Chinese to English and vice versa, hibernate to set how long it takes for the controller to sleep or to set it to never sleep, reset to factory reset the device to completely defaults, and finally the About section shows device info and the firmware versions. You also get a QR code for the online manual, but it's only the Chinese version, so not very useful. So now let's take a look at software customization. First of all, there's an Android app available, and it's called FlyDigi Game Center. This allows you to apply firmware updates to your controller, and it also comes with a built-in screen mapper. The only real problem is that the screen mapper is really sketchy and requires you to enable USB debugging and all other kinds of stuff on your device. This is not something I would recommend doing, but if you want to, the option is here. But for the most part, your customization is primarily going to be done through the FlyDigi Space Station 3 program, which is available for Windows. And yeah, it is a shame that this isn't available outside of Windows. I hope they'll maybe consider releasing a Mac and a Linux version eventually. But for now, it does work fine on a Windows virtual machine on a Linux host. So let's go over all the available options. First of all, your controller should be detected and connect automatically. On the left-hand side, you're going to see 4 configs that can be renamed. And these are the 4 configs that you can flip between on the controller itself. You can also export or import your configs too. The rest of the screen will give you a general overview of the setup of your controller with several links to go to different sections. Under the Function Settings menu, you can set up the Quick Profile switch. With this enabled, you can press Select and any face button to switch between the 4 profiles. I really recommend turning this on, it makes the controller much easier to use. And then you can of course set the sleep timer as well. Under the Buttons section, you're going to be able to remap any button to any other button you want, including the macro keys. When you click on any button, you'll get the option to set it to that other button, or to a turbo, or to a macro, or to a multi-function key, which in this case means a mouse button. The rapid fire section is for turbo. You can choose the button that you want to set up, and then you can set it to hold it down for rapid fire, or to toggle rapid fire on or off. And then you can change the frequency as well. You can enter the macro screen and then click Create New, and then just start tapping away the buttons on your controller to start a macro. You can then mess with the timings using the boxes on screen. You can set the trigger method here as well. The joystick section will let you control the response curves of your analog sticks, their dead zones, or set either stick as a mouse. The motion sensing section is for gyroscope. You can think of FPS mode as moving the controller around in front of you, and racing mode as tilting the controller left and right. You can select a specific button to activate the gyro, and then say whether you want it to toggle the gyro on and off, or just be on while you're holding the button. You can also enable the gyroscope universally. This will actually work on any game and any platform you connect it to other than the Switch, because that already does gyro. So this will work on PC, Android, and iOS, which is just awesome. I just love adding gyroscope support to my shooter games. You also get a few options to control the sensitivity and stuff like that as well. The trigger section will give you the same options as the onboard menu did, but with expanded controls as well. You can control how each different behavior feels and responds. For example, in sniper mode, you can set how far you want to be able to push the button down before the shot activates. In the recoil mode, you can set the frequency of the recoil. The vibration mode in particular gives you a ton of options. Then you can click the test button to test how your vibration feels. In vibration mode, the triggers will vibrate at the same time as the rest of the controller, but only when the trigger is pushed down. You can click the test button to start vibrating the controller and then press down on your triggers to feel the trigger vibration too. By the way, this Chinese text at the bottom is to reset your triggers to default. And if you see this button anywhere else, it's the same thing, just reset to default. And the general section is going to give you the ability to customize your LEDs and your vibration intensity. There are several vibration modes available, including breathing, gradient, and always on. And you can change the color, of course. You can also choose to have the LEDs completely disabled. My favorite setting here is feedback mode. This makes the lights shine when you press the button or move the analog stick. This looks super cool, but I wish that you could customize each color for each button. So now it's time to talk about the adaptive trigger section. And adaptive triggers are a unique aspect of the Apex 4 that make it behave kind of like a PlayStation DualSense. And it means that rumble and triggers and stuff like that will adapt to the game that you're playing. A good example of this is in Forza Horizon 4, in which the triggers and the vibration will change depending on what terrain you're currently driving over. In Doom Eternal, the trigger will feel different depending on which gun you have equipped. It is pretty amazing, but it requires some pretty hefty, extensive setup to get going properly. And it also usually requires adding a mod to your game. Also, the descriptions of the behavior and how this works are still all in Chinese for the most part. It's a little out of scope for this video, so I'm not going to go into how to set it up, but if you want to invest the time, you can get some pretty awesome results. On the screen settings menu, you can change what's displayed on the Apex 4 screen. There are some suggested options that you can activate with a single click. Or you can click the settings button to upload your own JPEG, PNG, or GIF. However, note that you need the controller connected with a wire to change any of the screen settings. By the way, if you want to completely disable the screen, all you need to do is to upload a completely black image. Well, in reality, this won't disable the screen, but you won't be able to see it through the polarizing film. The status bar setting menu will let you show the battery life, connection method, and other stuff on the screen at all times if you want to. But you can always just see this briefly by pressing the home button anyway. Then you can go to test mode to test the setup of your controller, including your sticks, your buttons, and your gyroscope. Finally, the switch mode is kind of the same as the PC config, except it will change settings for the Nintendo Switch connection. As far as I know, this is a feature that's pretty unique to FlyDigi controllers. That is, having full customization of your controller on the Nintendo Switch. This is of course excluding the gyroscope because that's built into the Switch already. Suffice to say, you get a huge amount of customization both in hardware and in software with the Apex 4. Much of the device's functionality can be programmed using the onboard menu, but for everything else you have access to both an Android app and this amazing computer program. In the end, the FlyDigi Apex 4 is more than just a controller. It's a device that is not only unique in itself, its looks, and its feature set, but it also becomes unique to its owner as well. It offers incredibly deep, three-dimensional customizations through hardware such as the adjustable sticks and force feedback triggers, through the onboard OS and its quick settings, and of course through the endless software customization. It's a controller that gives back just as much as you put into it, and it does so while being an incredibly premium, well-built, and reliable controller as well. If you don't enjoy tinkering and customization, the Apex 4 is still an incredibly well-made, comfortable, and is perfect for both retro 2D and modern 3D gaming. So I'm sure you realize that I love this controller. In fact, I only have 3 minor complaints about it. The first is that it is certainly very heavy for a controller. The second is that perhaps this controller is more suited to quote-unquote serious games. You know, the ones where stuff bloweth up. And finally, as functional and great as that little screen is, I wish it just looked a little better and not so washed out. Outside of that though, I honestly cannot in good faith say that I don't find this controller utterly perfect. The FlyDigi Apex 4 kind of feels like the best possible type of over-engineering, in which so many frankly crazy ideas have been smushed into one tiny device. And yet all of those things end up being perfectly synchronized, and making a unique, personable, and just gosh darn great controller. No single feature of its extensive feature set is lazily implemented or left behind. And with that in mind, I award the Apex 4 my highest possible recommendation, for anyone looking for basically an endgame controller. Let me know what you think of it in the description box below. Thanks very much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again next time.